Swamiji.
Namaskar,
Om
namaskar.
Asma
Good
Pubhyo
morning.
Namaha.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah.
Namaskar, Swamiji, namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar, namaskar.
Okay, so all of
Namaskar, Swami.
Namaskar, namaskar. Yeah.
Okay, Swamiji, I just want to introduce all of you.
Yeah.
Swami Tattwamayananda is currently the minister in charge of the Vedanta Society of Northern California in San Francisco. He has served in various centers of the Ramakrishna Order in India as editor, publisher, and teacher of Sanskrit and Indian philosophy. The Swami is frequently invited for lectures on yoga, Vedanta, and traditional Hindu scriptures. So we are really honored to have Swamiji, and Swamiji is going to talk about the topic, how to build and sustain your spiritual practice. So Swamiji, it's all yours, and we are very honored to have you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
There will be an interaction for some time.
Yes, we can have interaction for a couple of minutes after, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
So, okay, right. So, the subject of building and sustaining our spiritual life. Well, I can begin by drawing an example, an important lesson from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. According to Patanjali, the majority of us have one serious problem in building and sustaining spiritual life. That is, when we read a book, or when we pray in a temple or a church or any place of worship, or when we listen to a lecture on spirituality, or when we take part in a prayer session, we feel like great enthusiasm, we feel great joy, and we may sometimes take a decision, well, tomorrow morning onwards I shall meditate every day. We may take such a decision. And then what happens frequently, when tomorrow morning comes, we may have a tendency, sometimes if maybe today I'm a bit busy, tomorrow I can do that. So sometimes this tendency to postpone, to procrastinate any spiritual practice. Actually, it is a play of the mind, because there's a conflict between spiritual practice, which is a new habit, and the habits that we have already formed. It is not just a conflict between habits, it is a conflict between two types of samskaras, two types of mindsets. Now, what we should do, we may feel hesitation, we may feel like postponing, we may even come out with some false justification for not doing prayer that particular day, rather it could do another day. Kind of, one part of the mind actually turns against us. Another part of the mind is willing to cooperate. So frequently, the helpful mind, the friendly mind, represents healthy samskaras, spiritually helpful samskaras which are more conducive to spiritual life, sustaining spiritual life. The other bundle of samskaras may not be very friendly. They try to create hurdles, obstacles in our path. In fact, Patanjali calls it vikshiptam manah. What it means is, mind is divided into two conflicting groups. That is, the one part of the mind is helpful, cooperative, is a friend, because we have already have in our mind some healthy samskaras. We have made an attempt to practice, at least we are may have made several attempts reading, associating with spiritual persons, discussing spiritual ideas. These are different ways of depositing spiritual wealth in our bank, our spiritual bank, which is our mind. But the other part of the mind is not so friendly. It represents negative samskaras. Because the mind is like a lake, Mind is compared to a lake and also a bundle. A bundle of conflicting samskaras and a lake with different layers. At the top layer of the lake, there is pure, clean water. Below, a lot of mud, filth and dirt. That's why sometimes, why we feel a great conflict. We feel, tomorrow I would meditate, not today. Because when we try to sit and meditate, when we try to sit and practice some spiritual disciplines, a lot of filth and dirt within the lower layers of our mind will come to the surface. You think of cleaning up a lake. Take a big pole, stick, and you stir the lake. What happens, A lot of dust and filth which have accumulated at the lower layers of the mind may come to the surface. Sometimes it is a very frightening experience. So what we should do to face this problem? So one important thing we should remember is we are a bit afraid, and the fear is we think, well, if I do not fully succeed, it's a big problem. So if I am not able to meditate for a long time, then it's a great loss. But in spiritual practice, one important thing to remember is even a little bit of spiritual practice will be helpful. Even if you are not able to practice, a desire to practice spiritual life, to live a spiritual life, that desire itself will generate a spiritual energy. And once you develop a strong desire to spiritual life, then what happens is that desire itself will generate a lot of healthy samskaras, healthy impressions, healthy thought currents in our mind, and mind will slowly turn towards spiritual life. Then we will face less and less conflicts in not only building up but in sustaining, enjoying spiritual life. One should be able to enjoy spiritual life. How do we understand that our mind has finally turned, mind has become a friend? When the mind smiles at you when you try to meditate. Actually, your mind will smile at you when you try to do something that you like, really. Say a child doesn't want to study. He wants to play. He wants to watch TV shows all the time. Because he has developed a habit of enjoying that. Actually, we want to do things that we enjoy doing it. So how to develop a joy in leading a spiritual life? How to develop a joy in praying, in meditating, in maintaining a spiritual discipline? For that, we must constantly put small deposit checks in the spiritual bank. Reading a good book, associating with spiritual persons, meditating. Even if you are not able to meditate, even a decision, well, I will meditate, that itself will create a spiritual energy. That's the difference between physical activity and mental activity. In the world of physical activities, you have to do something, then only it will produce an effect, a visible effect, a tangible effect. But in spiritual life, even a desire to do something will itself produce a positive effect. Even if you are not able to physically meditate, developing a desire to meditate, developing a desire to read a holy book itself will generate spiritual wealth. So try to practice so many different, all these various methods: reading books, listening to ideas, associating with spiritual persons in as many ways as possible. That will slowly turn the mind forward. Second problem that we often face is, after some distance, after traveling some distance, we may feel that we have reached a dead end. We feel there is no momentum further. That's because we expect spiritual life to be a straight line progression, vertically moving forward. No, spiritual life actually moves in curves. It has high tides and low tides. Sometimes it moves in curved lines, not straight lines. After doing a lot of spiritual practices, many devotees complain frequently. They would say, "Oh, now we feel we reached a dead end. We don't feel the same joy. Have lost interest." Actually, never imagine that it is the end of the journey. During the early part of spiritual life, sometimes we may feel a great joy. It's just like going from 0 to 3. Let us think of spiritual life as in graphic terms, let's say 10 stages, let us say. Think of spiritual life as a ladder with 10 steps. From 0 to 3rd step, you may feel a lot of momentum, lot of excitement, lot of joy. And then once you reach the 3rd step, you feel, oh, you have lost all interest. You feel that, well, oh no, I don't feel anything happening. It's not that nothing is happening. The point is, after some momentum is reached, you don't feel the speed, the momentum. So from 0 to 3, you feel very intensely that you are progressing in spiritual life. From 3 to 7, which is a longer distance, you don't feel any momentum. It doesn't mean that you are not progressing, but the momentum is not so well felt. So this is an important point to remember. So continuity and break in spiritual life. When we think of this, when you think of the facing problem, we should know spiritual life is not expected to happen in a straight line. Second point is, we have a lingering fear. Well, if I don't meditate, I decided so many times. I worked hard to create to build up a routine, but I could not succeed. I did not fully succeed. So does that mean that I'm not going to achieve anything? No. Even a desire, an idea, an unfulfilled intention to lead spiritual life will have a creative, a constructive, a positive effect in our spiritual life. This is a very, very important point, remember. That's why in spiritual life the motto should be, nothing is lost and you are never late. Nothing is lost. You are never late. In some of the traditional devotional schools, there is an interesting theory. Every obstacle is a blessing. So there is a well celebrated verse in Sanskrit. Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam gharamyaham bandhavaischa viyogena prasham bhavati dukkhitaha tena dukkhena samtapto idimam na parityajet tam prasadam karishyami yet devairapi sudurlabham. It's a Sanskrit verse. I should explain elaborately in English. What it means is, it is as if God is making a statement. Now, what does He say? Those whom I want to bless, those whom I want to favor, I shall give him or I shall give her plenty of problems. Why? It's not a very wonderful thing to have problems in spiritual life. So I shall give him or give her plenty of problems. Is a literal tasya vittam haramyaham. Haramyaha means I shall take away all his wealth. That is not a very pleasant experience. So there is a symbolic interpretation, Suppose you are very wealthy, very proud of your wealth, then your pride and greed stand in the way of your spiritual life. But God wants to take you away from that difficult road, or rather God wants to take away those obstacles in your spiritual path. So what does He do? He takes away all your wealth. So poverty is sometimes considered to be a big curse. So a great devotee will look upon poverty as a blessing. Now remember, this is a very symbolic meaning. I don't mean to say poverty is a blessing, everyone should try to be poor, not at all. What I mean to say, that means the art of interpreting and looking upon even problems in life as a special favor from God. Can you think of many of the Christian saints? One example I could say, Saint Joseph. He was very dull, very ignorant, very unlearned. And because he was such a dull person, it became a blessing to him. And he became a great saint. He was canonized maybe in 1730. He was born in Italy, a place called Cupertino, not your Bay Area Cupertino, but it's Cupertino in Italy, perhaps. He was born at the end of the 17th century or so. So what I mean to say, such examples can be found in large numbers in Hindu tradition. I mean, devotees who considered every problem as a blessing. So that, when you have an obstacle on the road, that helps you to build muscles, strong muscles, calf muscles when you walk. If you are walking every day through smooth road, plain road, you may not build strong, a healthy body. But suppose every day you walk a little, let's say in San Francisco streets are wonderful for that, exercise. You walk up, so it's good for health. So obstacles are like the road to the top of the hill. If you climb the hill, your diabetes gone, your cholesterol gone, everything. You feel physically, mentally healthy. Like in spiritual life, obstacles and problems are blessings. So that should be our approach. So when you feel discouragement, when you feel skepticism, and when you feel negativity, we should remember it is natural. Spiritual life is not going to be very smooth. Another point is, when you feel that, I cannot meditate, I cannot pray, then don't go and play cards. If you cannot meditate, read a holy book. That you can do. If you cannot meditate, at least you can chant, you can recite a hymn, a psalm, a prayer. If you cannot do that even, then read a good book, a wonderful book on spiritual life. Even if you cannot read a book on mysticism and spiritual life, the Bhagavad Gita, Bible or Upanishad, then you read some higher philosophy. I mean, anything that lifts your mind away from the physical level, lifting your mind at least the intellectual level, mental intellectual level. Anything that takes you away from the physical empirical level is the beginning of our spiritual journey. So one should remember, there are so many ways of sustainment. If we cannot meditate because of some conflicts, something happened in the office, maybe some difficulties that you have to face in your workplace, when you try to meditate, all the impressions come to the surface. When you sit quiet and watch the TV, no problem, you are very happy. But sit in a small room in your own secluded place and try to meditate, then all the demons begin to appear. All the samskaras, impressions coming from the lower levels of the mind come to the surface. I mean, the different opinions, the debates, the discussions you had in the board meetings, maybe the discussions you had when you were talking to your customers or when you were negotiating with your business partners. In all these activities, there will be different opinions, conflicts of opinions and so on. All these will come to the surface the moment we try to meditate. So what we should do, there are two methods. One, we should try to continue. We should not discourage ourselves. We should not stop spiritual practice when there is the slightest indication of an obstacle or a conflict. But if the conflicts become too intense, then we should not force ourselves, because that will produce pain and that will produce certain problems, so that next time you will have a disinclination to meditate, because you try to meditate and you face a lot of conflict. So I shall not meditate. So what you should do, when you are not resolved, we are able to resolve the conflicts, then come out, read a good book, some spiritual book, because reading spiritual book also is helpful in generating spiritual samskaras. You are putting more and more spiritual samskaras in your mental system. So what is samskara? I shall try to explain. Most of you know what is samskara. Samskara is the residual effect or impact of any action we do. When we do something at the physical level, when we finish a work, or when we speak, or when we read, physical activities, intellectual activities, all these will produce one kind of effect that is tangible, visible, obvious, that we feel at the time of doing. There is another kind of effect that's not felt and experienced at the time of doing, but it produces an effect and it remains the mental system, and that is called samskara. Our habits, when they become solidified, becomes a samskara. So if you cannot meditate, if you read a holy book, or you start a discussion on some spiritual topics with your friend, a debate or discussion, what did you understand by this particular statement in this book? Any discussion, any activity that will create a healthy samskara, and that will eventually help you to reduce conflicts and will produce a mind that will cooperate when you try to meditate. And even if we cannot engage in a discussion intellectually, there is another kind of another way of generating spiritual samskaras. Do some physical activity without any selfish purpose. If we cannot read a holy book because we cannot meditate, then go to a nearby place, any holy place, and clean up the place. You can clean a temple or a church or any place of worship, or you can help somebody in whatever way possible. So because these physical activities generate spiritual energy. Physical activities done without a selfish motive, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, will generate an invisible effect, and that invisible effect is called spiritual samskaras. So I have seen this happening frequently. Many devotees who cannot listen for a long time, listening to talks on Gita, Bhagavad Gita or Upanishads, or attend prayer. I told them, you have some temples in Silicon Valley. Why don't you act as a volunteer? And some of them started going to temples before lockdown, of course, not before lockdown. This happened, and every week they will go. They will help in. They will participate in cooking food for distributing among the devotees as prasad. Sometimes they will clean up the place, the surroundings, the temple. Every week they will go, and gradually they evolved, because they were doing all these as if it's a great sacred activity. They are not going to be paid for it, and they know that. And still, they did it with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness and concentration. So that activity generated healthy samskaras in the mental system. And then mind slowly turned around and became a friendly mind. A mind that cooperates with you when you try to meditate. So we should always remember, good, unselfish physical activity will generate spiritual energy, spiritual samskaras, and we slowly will have a positive effect on the mental system. So this is a very, very important point. Remember, we don't often recognize this. I mean, the importance of service activities in generating spiritual energy. And how do we feel that we are generating spiritual energy? We feel happy about it. We feel contentment within. See, we are not people. I have seen this happening among devotees who come to this temple. We have big programs. They do all the cooking, they do all the serving, they construct a huge tent for our Olima memorial programs that could seat more than 900 people, 1,000, sometime 1,200, 1,200 people will assemble the program, and devotees are erecting this tent, volunteers, not paid, but they do all that, and they do it with great enthusiasm. Now, why do people come on a regular basis with a strong desire to do this physical work which they never do in their own homes? They don't erect a big tent in their homes. They don't cook for so many people. And they have to spend money, they have to spend time, they have to spend a lot of energy. That's because by doing this service activity, they are generating spiritual energy. And when spiritual energy is generated, what happens is, mind feels a tremendous experience of tranquility, peace, and happiness. It's not a happiness that you get when you buy a new car. It's a different kind of a happiness. This happiness comes because you have spent time, energy, and money and driving long hours from your home to come to these holy places, and you do this service work. So, and people are fascinated by this. And you find there are people who enjoy doing this. Why? Because their mind has evolved, the mind has learned to enjoy doing service activities. The same mind will, after some time, in course of time, will start enjoying doing spiritual practice. So, when we enjoy doing something, we don't feel any strain. That is an important point. It's called Chitta Prasada, the inexplicable, indescribable inner feeling of contentment. the contentment has a healing effect on the mind. All the skepticism, doubts and conflicts will have a healing effect. You are putting some balm on it and you feel happy about it. Now, this could happen to anyone, really speaking. So here I am talking about people who may not necessarily be ready to surrender themselves to God. Of course, the highest level, those who surrender themselves to God, for them this inner contentment is natural. It comes automatically. It comes instantly. But I know that it's very difficult to understand in this 21st century complex social structure where you have to work hard and every day you are coming face to face with a difficult world or competition, utilitarian values, pragmatism, all these things are important. So still, if a person can think of God as the one who decides everything, all these become easy. You can find this in many traditions, So when we think of God, we should not ever imagine that God's grace comes in a platter. We should work hard. Karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, all these are various disciplines that will make us capable of, that will help us to make use of God's grace, enjoying God's grace. So, God's grace doesn't come in a platter. Even if it comes, we won't be able to enjoy it. We should become grace worthy. We should become worthy of grace. We should become fit, spiritually fit to enjoy God's grace when it comes. And how do we make ourselves spiritually fit? Through the practice of unselfish service, through the practice of spiritual qualities. And I especially emphasize Karma Yoga because Karma Yoga has got one effect. You don't even to practice Karma Yoga at the beginning, you don't even have to practice much conventional religious disciplines. If you practice unselfishness, a sense of sanctity and sacredness, you can practice Karma Yoga. But it becomes meaningful and effective when we think that action alone cannot produce any lasting effect in spiritual life. Action plus devotion. Action plus devotion alone can do. Because without devotion, without this higher spiritual ideal, we will not be able to practice one important element of Karma Yoga, that is detachment, non-attachment, total unselfishness. These are the fundamental qualities for every Karma Yogi. And without belief in a higher ideal, without belief in a trans-empirical, transcendental spiritual ideal, we will not be able to practice Karma Yoga in the true sense of the term. I should always emphasize this point. Extreme pragmatism is the worst enemy of spiritual contentment in 21st century. I am not talking about pragmatism or utilitarianism as expounded by J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill or Jeremy Bentham as a philosophical system. An extreme utilitarian pragmatic approach to life and actions, that's the greatest enemy of mental peace in modern times. We should be able to do things without expecting any practical reward for itself. Not in the office, but outside our profession, outside our office place. We should be able to do things for the good of others without expecting any reward and with the full conviction that it is not going to give any worldly reward for us, then what happens? We get spiritual reward. Spiritual reward comes when we deny worldly reward. So, when we can practice Karma Yoga, looking upon whatever we do as an act of worship, as an offering to God, or as an act of service for the good of humanity, what happens is these activities done with total dedication and unselfishness will produce a great spiritual wealth. And that spiritual wealth will be felt when we feel great tranquility and joy and inner peace. And that's an indication that we are progressing in spiritual life. And once we start feeling this joy, tranquility and peace, then there will be no problem for sustaining spiritual life. That's an important point, remember. If a person is not able to sustain spiritual life, it's because the person expects the journey to be a very smooth one, without any hurdles. Spiritual life, at the beginning of the journey, can appear to be a bit problematic. But slowly, as we accumulate more and more spiritual samskaras and healthy samskaras, we will reach a point where we won't feel the conflict, we won't feel the burden. Then what happens? We will slowly start enjoying spiritual life. As I mentioned, there are karma yogis right now who are so worried that they cannot come to the Vedanta society during the lockdown. Because before lockdown, they used to attend programs of Guru Purnima programs, different celebrations. They used to do all the cooking, serving, making arrangement, chair arrangement, seating arrangement, everything they used to do with great joy. Now they are so worried that that's because they have developed a feeling of enjoyment in doing this unselfish work. Which means mind has evolved so much, mind has accumulated a lot of sattvic samskaras. So such a mind starts enjoying unselfishness or service activity for the good of others without any selfish purpose. So if one can enjoy unselfish work, if one can enjoy doing unselfish work without any selfish motive, that shows such a mind is slowly evolving, it is already evolved. And how do we feel that our mind is evolving? We feel a great joy, tranquility and peace. Such a person can handle any problem in life. That's the thing. If you can do that, we'll be able to find solutions to our problem within our own resources you find. So once this ability to enjoy spiritual life, enjoy being unselfish, enjoy doing service for others, feeling for others, then what happens is we feel great inner joy, and then we'll be looking for continuing these service activities. We will be able to sustain spiritual practice. So also, such a person who has accumulated and built up a lot of spiritual wealth will find his mind automatically goes to higher ideas when you try to meditate or pray or reading books. See, as I mentioned, we enjoy doing what our mind is interested in. We can slowly change the interests, our own interests, by changing the structure of samskaras, by generating new samskaras, sattvic samskaras, spiritually helpful samskaras. Mind can change and mind can develop good desires, sublime desires, desire to do spiritual practices, desire to do unselfish activities, desire for helping others, But important point that just the opposite of extreme pragmatism that is becoming a cult in modern times. We should be able to do things without a pragmatic, an ultra pragmatic utilitarian outlook, without looking for rewards, without looking for any beneficial results. But we will get a really beneficial result, that is our own peace and happiness and the ability to continue and sustain our spiritual practice. Now we can have interaction maybe for 10 minutes. You are most welcome.
Okay, everyone, one at a time, please. You can ask questions to Swamiji. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
So Swamiji, I have one question for you. So the question is, suppose if the person is motivated and he is willing to do the practice, but he is in the environment which may not be conducive, or you have somebody in the house, they are not willing to join your practice, or they choose a different practice. So what will be the best way for these kind of situations for people to continue the practice?
Yeah.
Or the other situation, like you said, we are used to some activity and practice, but now because of the pandemic, everything is changed. So how to then shift to something which will help the person to sustain what he used to do, or transform the practice into a new mode?
Yeah, the pandemic is not going to be a permanent problem, hopefully. But even during this time, one can devote time to reading, which doesn't require other people's cooperation. It is your own work. You may not be able to do things in groups as in a congregation, in groups when others may not share your enthusiasm. But still, you can turn your mind into those activities which do not involve the active involvement of others who may be less interested in these spiritual practices. So that's why reading, writing, or those activities. And of course, once the lockdown is lifted, you can always find places where people gather for spiritual practices and for listening to these ideas. But this mean that you should always get the cooperation from others. There are things that you can do of your own. I think that is one thing. Second point is, gradually people may also, those who are not willing to cooperate with you right now, may also change their attitude and may start cooperating with you, may start willingly helping you in your spiritual path. This has happened to many people, but this may not happen to everyone. In that case, one should always go and visit places to discuss spiritual ideas. Association is very important in spiritual life. Unless you have association with people, with the right kind of people, you may not be able to continue and sustain spiritual life. Because when you associate with people whose words will encourage you, will give you more confidence and hope, you may not be able to reinforce, you may not be able to sustain yourself. So good association, healthy association is very important. In a very broad sense, reading a holy book is a kind of an association with the person who has written that book. But more importantly, it is always good to have association, active and direct association with spiritual seekers. Yeah, association will always be helpful. As a pandemic is not a permanent phenomenon. During this time, we can divert our attention to certain activities, intellectual activities, which can be carried on even without the active assistance of everyone involved. Okay?
I have a question.
I have a question.
I have a question.
You know the You were talking about meditation.
Yeah.
How do you start to do the meditation? How can you put your attention to meditation? Maybe, as you have said, it may not be possible to do it for a longer period of time. At least to start, how do you do how can I approach
Yeah.
to do the meditation?
Yeah, meditation in the higher sense needs some discipline and some instructions, which may not be possible during this pandemic period, lockdown. But generally speaking, if you can build up the habit of reading good books, spiritual books, that will help you to develop a desire to sit and contemplate on those ideas. So, in a very unconventional way, without any formal training, you can read books like, say, let's say, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I would always recommend. Of course, I am very broad in this matter, but what I can always recommend to everyone with full confidence is the book called the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which contains the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, where that book can give you a lot of ideas. Once you read that book, you will have a natural inclination to sit and contemplate on the teachings of that book, and that contemplation can eventually lead to meditation. And as for active instruction, after the pandemic is over, if you visit Vedanta societies, after the lockdown is lifted, if you visit Vedanta society here, you will get you can get some helpful suggestions.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Shobna. Is religious, spiritual and religious? I don't understand the difference. I came from the family, we didn't do rituals. My parents didn't do rituals. They see every human being has a God in them, you help them. How I grew up. But as I grew up, I'm not that strong. I need God for me. So is it spiritual is different and religious is different, and which is better? Or my parents taught us everybody, a human being has a God, and you serve that God. Instead of doing puja, spending money there, you spend money on them. The books for poor student, the sewing machine for the lady who can sew the clothes for others and make money. That's how I grew up. Is that right way, or the spiritual way and religious way?
Yeah. So religion frequently gets a bad name, not because religion is bad, but because those who profess religion may not always do justice to the highest ideal of religious. Religion in its true sense, in its real sense, is spirituality. So spirituality is nothing but the essence of true religion. Spirituality can be broadly defined as being a good person to everyone in this world, not only to those who belong to your own religion, but those, not only human beings. Spirituality can be, in the broadest sense, can be defined as seeing the same divine reality in everyone and looking upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family, without any prejudice, dislike, hatred or anything. That is a very, very simple definition of spirituality. And this is actually the end and the goal of all religious practices. Frequently, in conventional religious practices, this is not often emphasized. But that's natural, because in society, frequently religion takes different forms. There are different interests. So religious practice can take different forms, can be very unspiritual. Many religious ideas have become very unspiritual, which spread hatred instead of love, harmony, humanity, good feeling towards others. This could happen, but we need not worry about it. So religion in the truest sense is spirituality, is feeling the presence of God not only in us or in our temples or our place of worship, but everywhere, not only within a place of worship, but also outside the place of worship. That is spirituality. So, if somebody says, well, I won't practice, I won't engage in religious practices, I will do only helping others. Really speaking, there is a big problem there. If a person is really spiritual, he may not be performing rituals, but he may not condemn rituals. See, there is no need to condemn those who conform to different kind of religion and spirituality. So, in the true sense, spirituality is broad-mindedness, universal outlook. So, you need not condemn your own interpretation of religion or spirituality. That's an important thing to remember. So, there are people who perform rituals which contain lot of mantras, which are deeply spiritual, but not everyone fully understands the significance of these mantras or to appreciate it. That's true. But there are those who do understand it. That also is there. So there is no need to condemn anything. So a spiritual outlook is essentially a universal humanistic outlook towards others. You will be happy within, peaceful and tranquil within, and you also will express this happiness and tranquility and peace and harmony in your interaction with others.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well said, thank you.
Swamiji, one more question
Yeah.
from these kind of people. Some of these at this point of life realize that maybe they didn't focus on the spiritual aspects of their being, but now they are concerned for their new generation and they want them to have the prosperous spiritual life. But because they don't have the big foundation onto that one, so what will be a good starting point for them, and how should be their journey be planned to the fruition?
Yeah. No, frequently it happens, during the early years they didn't themselves much care for spiritual practices and know what they want their next generation. That is fine. They can right now they can start taking interest in these things. They can teach their new generation, encourage them in a friendly way to read books which are helpful for leading a spiritual life, to create humanistic values, spiritual values of harmony and broad-mindedness and peace. That's one way of doing it. Certainly, it's wonderful. So they need not worry that they couldn't spend a lot of time for building up spiritual life during the early years. They need not worry about it. Now they have realized its importance. They can start encouraging others. Nothing wrong. You need not worry about lost years.
There is a question on the chat, Swamiji.
Yeah.
Divakar, is asking a question. What is the spiritual equivalent word in Indian language?
Spiritual, Adhyatmikata. Adhyatmikata is the word, Sanskrit word. Adhyatmikata means Sanskrit word, means yeah, Atmiya and Adhyatmikata both means spirituality. So remember, in India, Hinduism as expounded in the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads and important religious texts, canonical literature, was always interpreted as a spiritual way of life. So Hinduism can be broadly defined as a spiritual way of life. That's why you find accepting all religious traditions as equally valid paths leading to the same goal for everyone. Remember, it doesn't mean that all religions are it doesn't mean that all religions are the same or identical. But all religions have a value, because if a person is sincere, honest and spiritual in the true sense of the term, loving the whole humanity without any prejudice or hatred, looking upon God as the God of the whole humanity, not a God of his own people, his own tribe, a very broad-minded universal idea of God, then that religion can take him to the highest spiritual experience. This is the approach of Hindu religion. Social practices may be different, conventions may be different, external rituals may be different. But if the individual is unselfish, pure, and if he is looking towards a universal humanistic ideal of Godhead who is compassionate to everyone in the world, including to those who don't accept him. That is the universality of Hindu outlook as you find in the Vedas. So the real term is this kind of adhyatmikata. That's a Sanskrit word. Or atmiyata, both are the same.
Swamiji, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Supposing you are living in an atmosphere in the family where most of the people, they are very nice people, hardworking and doing their work honestly, everything. But they don't want to go to the spiritual world or turn their mind into that, meditation or things like that. Is it okay to enjoy with them, or should somebody live that life to go towards a
Frequently what happens, old people, I've seen these aged persons when they reach 60 or 70 or 80 years, they will tell you, now these youngsters are not interested in spiritual life, but right now I'm interested. You should tell them, look here, when I was your age, I did not care for any spiritual values, but I understand its importance now. So why don't you try to be more intelligent than me? Now you are not old, you are young enough. Why don't you try to learn from my own experience? It took me all these years, I am now 80 years, now only understand the importance of spirituality. So why don't you show the intelligent wisdom to understand right now, long before you get my age? So you should be able to tell the children. They will understand it. So very often we say, I neglected spirituality when I was young. Now I want them to be spiritual. Why don't you tell, look at me. I made a mistake. You can tell them, you made a mistake when you did not imbibe spiritual values when you were young. Tell your children and grandchildren, well, you should be more intelligent than me. Don't make the mistake that I made. Actually, your words will be taken as a strong warning and indication. They will try to be more intelligent than you. I tell you, there is a lurking problem here. Many old people don't want their own children and grandchildren to take to spirituality. They want to be very successful in the world, as they tried in their own when they were young themselves. Really speaking, there is a lingering reluctance on the part of parents and grandparents in encouraging their own grandchildren or children to imbibe spiritual values, because they feel that that will impede, that may create problems in their own secular pursuits. No, secular pursuits, secular prosperity find its fulfillment when it is combined with spiritual values. That's an important point to remember. We should not ever imagine that secular life is one thing, spiritual value something else. There should be harmony, a synthesis, a friction-free synthesis of secular values and spiritual values. So one should try to be successful in secular life, have a good job. If you are students, have a high grade, and you should be a successful man in this world. But at the same time, remember, to be truly successful, you should have something more than success in this worldly life. You need something more. That's the real meaning of success. You are successful only when you are able to enjoy the success. Your success you are able to enjoy only when you have the mental health, spiritual health to enjoy and make use of your own success. For that, you need something more than worldly success. That is spiritual value. Spiritual value is a necessary element that makes your life more successful. Secular life becomes more fulfilling, more complete and more successful when you join spiritual values. Okay, so now we have already reached the limit of our time. Thank you for the wonderful questions and thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Pranam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Will you end the session with some prayer for us?
Okay.
A blessing for
Okay.
Shanti Buddha.
Yeah.
Namaskar, Swami. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om shanti 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 harihi om tat sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
This was so good. We are really honored, Swamiji. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are blessed to have you.
Very good.
Yeah.
We are very lucky to have a nice
Yeah.
lecture